Hey guys, it's Ray here from our.co.12 and EpicDroid.com. A little more than 2 years ago, I published an article on EpicDroid titled, Apple Did It First. It has since become one of the most popular articles on the site, and I keep getting requests to make a video for it. So here we are today to discuss the ways that Apple has innovated and changed the world that we live in. For anyone who knows me, they know I prefer Android over iOS. Many people think I'm even anti-Apple. The truth is, I am not anti-Apple. In fact, there have been many times where I've actually recommended an iPhone to someone. I even own a few Apple products myself. The biggest thing that really bothers me about Apple is what I refer to as the religion or the cult of Apple. I am not a fan of the way that people worship Apple. I hate the fact that people have raised it to an almost godlike status. Now don't get me wrong, I like to give credit where credit is due, and I have to say Apple is very good at what they do. Yet they often get credit that they don't deserve. Apple and its fans like to point out how awesome Apple is and how everyone else is always copying Apple. Well, that simply is not true. Apple is great at a lot of things, but coming up with new features and new ideas is not one of them. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. Steve Jobs famously said,
"It comes down to trying to expose yourself to the best things that humans have done, and then try to bring those things in to what you're doing." I mean, Picasso had a saying, he said, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." And we have, always been shameless about stealing great ideas.
Now, despite the way that it may look, I am not here to bash on Apple today, so much as I am here to make sure that people have all the facts. With today's video, I hope to debunk some of the myths and misconceptions that surround Apple, their innovations, and their inventions. One of Apple's claims to fame is that they invented the smartphone. There's one problem with that. They didn't. The very first smartphone was the Simon Personal Communicator, or the IBM Simon. It came out in 1992. The first iPhone wasn't released until 2007, a full 15 years later. The Simon was capable of making phone calls, checking email, and it could even run third-party apps. So after debunking that first myth, many of my friends will point out that Apple at least had the first smartphone with a touchscreen. Again, Apple wasn't the first. That honor still goes to the Simon. And the Simon wasn't even the first touchscreen out there. Touchscreens have been around for a long time. The first working touchscreen was developed by CERN in 1973. Once we've covered touchscreen smartphones, I am then reminded that it's okay because Apple invented MultiTouch, and everybody uses it today. In 2006, Steve Jobs told the world they had invented a new technology called MultiTouch.
We have invented a new technology called MultiTouch, which is phenomenal. It works like magic. You don't need a stylus. It's far more accurate than any touch display that's ever been shipped. It ignores unintended touches. It's super smart. You can do multi-finger gestures on it. And boy, have we patented it.
Again, this is also not true. MultiTouch was born in a very rough form in 1982 at the University of Toronto. There were many projects that took advantage of the concept, and it was used in all sorts of applications. Fast forward a few years to the early 2000s. Fingerworks was a company that took those early touchscreens and developed many technologies that built on the concept. Apple got word of what Fingerworks was doing, and they acquired the company in 2005. They then went on to use Fingerworks multi-touch technology in the first iPhone 2 years later. Yes, Apple was the first company that put multi-touch in a smartphone, but they definitely did not invent it. Another thing Apple is often given erroneous credit for is the tablet. Again, part of this misconception comes from Steve Jobs himself. He once said, "The iPad is something completely new. We are excited for customers to get their hands on this magical and revolutionary product and connect with their apps and content in a more intimate, intuitive, and fun way than ever before." That's great and all, but the iPad wasn't completely new. The first iPad was released on April 3rd in 2010. The first touchscreen tablet came out in 1989. It was the GridPad. The GridPad ran MS-DOS, had a touchscreen, and a stylus. Adding insult to injury, they didn't even come up with the name iPad. The original iPad was created by a Chinese company named ProView Technology in 2001. Apple's iPad didn't come out until 2010. ProView's iPad was a tablet computer that didn't really take off. When the company was in the process of filing for bankruptcy, Apple announced their iPad. ProView then turned around, canceled the bankruptcy, and sued them for $400 million and threatened all sorts of legal action. Eventually, Apple and ProView settled for the much smaller amount of $60 million US. Next up is another Apple mainstay, and it is a big selling point for their devices, and that is Siri. That's right, Apple did not invent Siri either. So back in 2003, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA, contracted the company SRI International to build them a personal assistant for military commanders. This personal assistant project was originally known as Cognitive Assistant That Learns and Organizes, or CALO for short. Shortly after starting CALO, the founders of SRI International took what they had learned on the project and started a new venture, Siri. Fast forward a little bit to 2009. Verizon and Siri have entered into a contract to create a Siri app that would ship on every Android device that Verizon supported. In early 2010, they released a standalone app on the Apple App Store. 3 weeks later, Steve Jobs called them to set up a meeting. That started the ball rolling, and Siri was quickly acquired by Apple for around $200 million. It goes without saying, Apple quickly canceled that Verizon contract. Another feature that Apple is often given credit for being first with is the Fingerprint Scanner on a mobile device. The iPhone 5S was the first iPhone to come equipped with a fingerprint sensor and Touch ID. It came out on September 10th of 2013. The first Android device to have a fingerprint scanner was the Motorola Atrix 4G. It came out in February of 2011. And that wasn't even the first smartphone to have a fingerprint sensor. The Toshiba G500 came with a fingerprint sensor as far back as 2007. And again, Apple didn't even come up with the technology they used. They paid $356 million to acquire the company Authentech. At the time of the acquisition, Authentech had already created the core technology that ended up becoming Touch ID and the fingerprint scanner on Apple devices. In September of 2017, Apple announced Face ID. Face ID was the successor to Touch ID that would use your face instead of your fingerprint to unlock your phone. Many Apple loyalists like to use this example as the first use of facial recognition on a mobile device. I don't know what the first device to use it was, but I do know that Android had Face Unlock as early as 2011 on Android 4.0. At this point in the conversation, my friends are grasping at straws. There's got to be something that Apple did before everybody else, right? Well, I don't know that they're good things, but they invariably point out that Apple was the first company that was brave enough to ditch the headphone jack, or the first company to come up with a notch to hide your front-facing camera. Now, I'm not a fan of either of those things, but the sad thing is they're still not Apple innovations. The first device that I know of that ditched the headphone jack was the HP Veer, and the first device that had the notch display was the Essential PH1. So once I've debunked all these other myths, there's only one place left to go. If you are an Apple lover, or even if you're not an Apple lover, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, at least Apple invented the iPod and MP3 players. Well, I hate to break it to you, but they didn't do that either. The first patent for an MP3 player was actually filed in the UK in 1979. And even though the patent was filed that far back, the concept didn't really catch on until 1998 with the Diamond Rio. The iPod didn't come out until October of 2001. So in conclusion, these here are just a few of the highlights and are in no way an exhaustive list of the things that have been attributed to Apple. I don't fault Apple for their products, nor do I think they are necessarily bad products. As I said earlier, they do make good devices. I may not particularly care to use them for myself, but they are not bad. My biggest gripe with Apple will always be the false pretense that they are better than everyone else. I don't believe they deserve the status symbol that we have awarded them. They make good products, but they are rarely, if ever, the first at anything. So if you guys have any questions or want to talk about anything in the video, feel free to comment down below. I'll reply as soon as I am available. If you've enjoyed this video and if you want to see more like it, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And as always, I just want to take a quick second to tell you all thank you for watching, thank you for all your support, and you all have an awesome day.